everyone, and happy Pioneer Day. We're thrilled to be gathered over social media to celebrate this special holiday with all of you. We pray that the Spirit of God will be with us as we remember the faith and strength of our pioneer ancestors. It's our hope that the music and words shared in this devotional will uplift and inspire you to keep moving forward with faith, even in uncertain times. We will now hear a musical number performed by Jamie Jackson and Sharon Anderson, sisters from West Haven, Utah. Following our musical number, we will hear from Kathy Smith, Mike and Marlene Hutchings, and Ellen Jepson. The speakers will be introduced by Emily Clark. Kathy Smith is the captain of the Far West Camp in northern Weber County, Utah. She served as historian and lesson leader and loves DUP. She and her husband, the late Bert Smith, have devoted their lives to promoting the principles of liberty by helping to distribute millions of pocket-sized U.S. constitutions and other books on the Founding Fathers' intent for a free and virtuous society. Kathy is the chair of a nonprofit where she promotes liberty on her Loving Liberty radio network, a free app, and at Liberty Hall. Thank you for joining us, Kathy.
I'm Kathy Smith, a member of the Far West Camp in Far West, Utah. In Far West, there's a hall called Liberty Hall, And at Liberty Hall, a statue of George Washington, a bronze, monumental size, of George Washington on his horse in a very commanding pose, his face fearless in battle and his arm outstretched, imploring his troops to be brave and fearless in battle and in defending liberty, which means the freedom from tyranny, the freedom to worship as one pleases, the freedom of speech, the freedom to assemble, the freedom to own property and to make a living for one's family. One of my children's great-grandfathers was James Hyde, who enlisted at barely 16 in the Connecticut Army in 1777. By that fall, he joined the troops in Pennsylvania under the command of General George Washington. James Hyde was at Valley Forge that winter, seeing and experiencing for himself the gnawing pains of hunger, with food so scarce, worn coats and trousers that were scant protection against the snow and the cold, wind howling through the threadbare tents, and then the damp cold of makeshift log huts, the sore and bleeding feet when shoes finally gave out, and the rags that replaced them would hardly hold together. Worst of all was the itch and the resultant sores from not being able to bathe. But through it all, the thought of home and family and comfort. James, along with the rest, resolved that he could do it if the others could, along with their honored leader, George Washington, who would continue to do his best in their behalf. By the time the Prussian soldier, von Steuben, came and started drilling and training the troops, the food, clothing, and shelter situation was improved. And now things looked even better with something to do besides thinking of our hardships, especially for James, young and energetic. James served his country for 6 years, seeing more than his share of valor and bravery, of death and suffering, and he emerged a man. His grandson, William Hyde, marched in the Mormon Battalion and later wrote of his grandfather, "He was an active good man through life and died in honorable old age." Another tribute called James Hyde a fine example of the sturdy pioneers who made the unkind soil of New England productive and succeeded by hard work in rearing families, the members of which have spread over the country and made possible by their energy the development of this great country of ours. This statue of George Washington and his bravery also reminds me of our pioneer forefathers and mothers who were also fearless in their pursuit of religious freedom. They endured hardships that we can barely imagine: persecution, violence, threat of extermination, starvation, and every kind of unjust treatment. They were physically driven out of the United States of America, but were loyal to their country nonetheless. In July of 1857, the Saints were celebrating the 10-year anniversary of their entry into the Salt Lake Valley. They were having picnics and speeches in the cool Cottonwood Canyon when word came that the Union Army was marching west to put down the Mormons. My husband's grandfather was Lot Smith, who had served in the Mormon Battalion with William Hyde. Brigham Young called Lot Smith to lead 60 men charged with detaining the 3,000 U.S. troops on the winter prairie and keeping them from entering the valley. Many have speculated how Lot could have possibly succeeded against an army thousands strong. How had he accomplished this feat, all the while holding fire and not inciting violence? One shudders to think of the alternative. Miracle is not too strong a word for the avoidance of the disastrous consequences that could have been. How does one measure a war that never happened? Shots that never escalated, a civil conflict never begun. We may never know the details of how it really happened, but many, including his posterity, believe it could not have happened without help from the other side. When the opposing commander gazed upon Lot's little band, he reported seeing many times the number than were really there. The promise that their numbers would be magnified had proved prophetic. Was it a masterful bluff or an optical illusion? Or were legions of angels lining up into the distance, not for the purpose of battle, but in hopes of preventing it? Lot Smith was charged with treason by the U.S. government, but he became a folk hero to his people. One girl vowed she would marry Lot Smith when she heard of his heroism in saving the saints. A new territorial governor replaced Brigham Young without fanfare, and a whole colony of people remained in their Zion. Lot Smith's deeds against the U.S. Army were forgotten 5 years later when he served during the Civil War. President Lincoln asked for a company of men to protect the telegraph lines, and Brigham Young chose Lot again to lead them. He had gone from a young private in the Mormon battalion to militia leader and back. For this final command, he received a commendation from the president. This service made him and his company some of the very few Civil War veterans from Utah. At the end of the Civil War, he returned home to Farmington and back to his agricultural and civil service vocations. In 1868, he met a girl named Alice Ann Richards, the one who vowed she would marry him someday. Just 19, she was swept off her feet by the dashing and now famous Lot Smith. They made a handsome couple. He, a prominent man with red hair and bright blue eyes, and she, the beautiful, well-educated daughter of Willard Richards. Their honeymoon period did not last long, however, before Lot was called to serve yet again. He left on a mission for the church in 1869. Then almost immediately after his return in 1870, he was asked by Brigham Young to colonize an area called Sunset on the Little Colorado River in northern Arizona. It was a foreboding place, but Lot accepted. As he and Alice Ann and their family traveled south, he passed others along the way who were giving up and coming home. President Brigham Young was heard to say, "I know a man who will go and stay there, Lot Smith." The experience in that part of Arizona almost broke the settlers who went there. While there in Sunset, Alice Ann buried 4 of the 9 children she had with Lot. After losing a daughter, she wrote, her father carried her to the grave in the apple orchard, where he thought to rest himself someday. It began to seem like my children were only born to die. In 1890, Alice Ann's father's estate was settled, and she received an inheritance. Some of her brothers had moved to a northern Utah town called Fielding. From her brother George, she purchased a small farm for herself, sight unseen. She was 41 years old. Alice Ann had lived in polygamy for over 20 years and in the United Order for over a decade. President Wilford Woodruff had issued a manifesto discontinuing the practice of polygamy in 1890. As a plural wife, now she no longer had any legal or social status. After living with Lot and bearing 9 children, she was suddenly single. But with this inheritance from her father, she could now make a new life for herself. These were some of her happiest years. She moved to Fielding and the hard-scrabble little farm. The area she settled had been dubbed Poverty Flats before she arrived. Still, she had 80 acres of her own, a small farmhouse, a team of horses, and a wagon. 2 years later, Lot Smith was shot by an Indian in Arizona. Nearly a decade later, his body was exhumed and returned to Farmington, where he had built his first rock home and served as sheriff, assessor, and legislator. His body received a hero's welcome. Lot had been a seasoned frontiersman, horseman, husband to 8 wives, and father to 52 children. He had been a man of honor. If the conflict of 1857, the Utah War, had been his only accomplishment, the title hero would have been well deserved. But Lot's entire life had been one of service and duty. He went wherever he was called and sacrificed everything for his God. My husband, Bert Smith, cherished the stories of his grandfather Lot and his personal memories of his grandmother Alice Ann. He also carried a conviction that one day he would meet his grandfather on the other side and be called to account. "Tell me, son, what have you done with my good name?" I know for a certainty that our ancestors are helping us from the other side. They will ask us what we have done with their good names and with the legacy of freedom that they fought so hard to leave us. I know we can be brave, and we will stand our ground for freedom and liberty.
Mike and Marlene Hutchings have served 2 missions, one to Spain, Barcelona, and a Pioneer Trek mission in Wyoming. Marlene is an author and board member of Time to Blossom. Michael is a retired judge, land developer, and board member of Ensign Peak Foundation. Both Michael and Marlene graduated from BYU Provo. Together, they have 12 children, 11 spouses of their children, and 22 grandchildren. Thank you, Michael and Marlene, for joining us tonight.
Hi, happy Pioneer Day. Welcome. I'm Marlene Hutchings. This is my husband, Mike Hutchings. And in conjunction with this Pioneer Day devotional, we are going to tell you a few stories about the pioneers and some of the interesting facts about it.
I'd like to begin by speaking about a very significant place in Utah and also in Utah history. And that place is named Ensign Peak. Ensign Peak is located north of the Utah State Capitol in Salt Lake City. It is located approximately 10th north in Salt Lake City, right at the head of Main Street. And so if you would stand on the east side of the Salt Lake Temple and look north up through Main Street, you will see at the very head Ensign Peak. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Ensign Peak and its fabulous history in the state of Utah. To begin, I'd like to quote Joseph Smith, who made a prophecy about the Latter-day Saints. And he said this: "I prophesied that the saints would continue to suffer much affliction and would be driven to the Rocky Mountains. Many would apostatize. Others would be put to death by our persecutors or lose their lives in consequence of exposure or disease. And some of you will live to go and assist in making settlements and build cities and see the saints become a mighty people in the midst of the Rocky Mountains." That statement or prophecy was articulated in 1842. In 1844, Joseph Smith was martyred. In 1846, the Latter-day Saints left Nauvoo, Illinois, and began emigrating west. As they were coming west, many people would be asking Brigham Young, the leader of the Latter-day Saints, "Brigham, where are you taking us? Where are we going?" And at the time, there was discussion about the possibility of Latter-day Saints immigrating to Vancouver Island, to Oregon, to Upper California, as it was known then, and also possibly even to Texas. This bothered Brigham Young very much to not know the answer to that question. And I'd like to read a quote from George A. Smith, who talked about this. And he said this: "After the death of Joseph Smith, when it seemed as if every trouble and calamity had come upon the saints, Brigham Young, who was president of the 12, then the presiding quorum of the church, sought the Lord to know what they should do, and where they should lead the people for safety. And while they were fasting and praying daily on this subject, President Young had a vision of Joseph Smith, who showed him the mountain that we now call Ensign Peak, immediately north of Salt Lake City. And there was an ensign fell upon that peak, and Joseph said, 'Build under the point where the colors fall, and you will prosper and have peace.'" After that great vision, Brigham Young knew exactly where the Latter-day Saints were going to go and where they would settle. He said, after that vision, "I have seen it," meaning Ensign Peak. "I have seen it in a vision, and when my natural eyes behold it, I shall know it." When he came into the valley on July 24, 1847, he being Brigham Young, was with Wilford Woodruff. Wilford Woodruff was driving his carriage. Brigham Young was suffering from mountain fever and was really confined to the carriage. Let me read a quote from Wilford Woodruff, where he talks about this experience at the mouth of Emigration Canyon on July 24, 1847. "President Young arose from his bed and took a survey of the country before him for several minutes. He then said to me, 'Drive on down into the valley. This is our abiding place. I have seen it before in vision. In this valley will be built the city of the saints and the temple of our God.'" After that experience, the saints settled in the area generally around the city and county building at 4th South and 2nd East. On the morning of the 26th of July, which was a Monday, Brigham Young came out of his tent, looked up at Ensign Peak, and said, "I want to go there." He and many of the other leaders decided to hike what is now called Ensign Peak. Those other leaders were Heber C. Kimball, Wilford Woodruff, George A. Smith, Ezra T. Benson, Willard Richards, Albert Carrington, William Clayton, and Lorenzo Dow Young. The first one to ascend the peak that day was Wilford Woodruff. The last one to ascend was Brigham Young. He still having suffered or was suffering from the effects of mountain fever. As they arrived to the top of the peak, they looked out over the area, over this great Salt Lake Valley. And in the process, Brigham Young said to the brethren there, "We will go and look at all the other valleys along the Wasatch, what is now the Wasatch Front." And he said, "We'll look at these valleys, but we'll all come back and acknowledge this is the right place for the settlement of the Latter-day Saints." From that area, they laid out the city, Ensign Peak being approximately 0 east, 0 west at the head of Main Street. And they laid out the city, decided where the temple and the city offices would be built. They also made a decision that they would raise an ensign to the nations. George A. Smith stated, "Perhaps this is a good place to raise an ensign to the nations." The suggestion was made, and they used Willard Richards' cane and a yellow bandana with black spots on it that was owned by one of my wife's ancestors, Heber C. Kimball. They tied the bandana to the end of the cane, raised it up, and waved it as a banner or an ensign to the nations. In fulfillment of prophecy in the Old Testament, which says, "And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth." After this experience that day, temple work was also performed in the Great Basin of the West at Ensign Peak. Many times before missionaries went out on missions, they would receive temple endowments at Ensign Peak. In 1849, Brigham Young dedicated Ensign Peak as a place of prayer, a place for the raising of an ensign to the nations, and also as a place for the performance of temple work. Truly, Ensign Peak was a significant place in the history of Utah as the pioneers came here. I would point out, too, that a very famous hymn authored by Joel Hills Johnson refers to Ensign Peak. Many of us have sung this hymn on many varied occasions. The hymn is named "High on a Mountain Top," and some of the key words in that hymn state, "High on the mountain top, a banner is unfurled. Ye nations now look up, it waves to all the world. In Deseret's sweet peaceful land, on Zion's mount, behold it stand." We invite each of you to hike Ensign Peak. Go there with your family. It's a beautiful, wonderful hike. It's not very long. And from the top of Ensign Peak, you can see this beautiful valley and have an opportunity to contemplate the marvelous things that have come to pass over these many years since Ensign Peak was first ascended on the 26th of July, 1847. Marlene?
So, Ensign Peak is significant to us because that's where we went. We hiked Ensign Peak on our first date. And then when I think of pioneers, I think of faith, fortitude, commitment, and covenant keeping. We served a mission on a handcart trek mission in Wyoming a few years ago, and you can still see there today the ruts in the ground from the wagon wheels and the handcart wheels. And we learned much more about pioneers and our pioneer heritage, and felt their spirits there in that land. And then we also served a mission in Spain where we saw many people come into the church, and them being pioneers as their first members of the church in their family. So a pioneer is, we're all pioneers. So as the saints were leaving Missouri, as they were removed from Missouri, they went into Quincy. There were 5 LDS people to 1 Quincy person, and the people of Quincy took the saints in and gave them food and clothing and shelter and kept them there until they were ready to move on, which they did, and they went on to Nauvoo. When they got there, of course, it was a swampy land. They had to drain the swamps, and because it was a swampy land, there were mosquitoes there, and the saints contracted malaria. When Joseph Smith raised himself from his bed of affliction of malaria after a couple of days, on July 22nd, 1839, he went about healing people and blessing them, healing them from their beds of affliction. Another gentleman wanted him to go and heal his family, and he couldn't go at the time, and so he appointed Wilford Woodruff to go for him and give them blessings, and he gave him his red hanky, which is in the museum we have in Salt Lake City today. And he told him that whoever he blessed and put the red hanky on their face, they would be healed. And so they were healed. As the saints moved west, they had other illnesses, as Joseph Smith prophesied, of cholera, smallpox, the flu, measles, mumps, and also accidents and exhaustion and starvation. Many people were run over by the wagon wheels, adults as well as children, and one young lady was run over. When her friends ran back to see her if she was okay, they could not find a pulse on her. And so they were preparing her grave, and they were sewing her up in her blanket when her eyes opened and she had come back to life. This young woman went on to the Salt Lake Valley, married, and had many children. One woman who died on the trail at Chimney Rock, her name is Mary Murray Murdoch, and many have heard of her and know her as Wee Granny. It says on her headstone that she says, "Tell John I died with my face toward Zion." And that's commitment and faith and fortitude, isn't it? Another pioneer that I'd like to tell you about, his name was John R. Moyle. He was in the first handcart company coming from England in 1856. He built and carved the spiral staircase in the Salt Lake Temple. And he was he would get up on Monday morning at 2 a.m. and start walking from Alpine, where he lived, to the Salt Lake Temple to work on the temple. And then he would work all week and return after work Friday at 5 p.m. He'd start walking back to Alpine. One day while he was milking his cows, one of the cows bolted and kicked him in the leg just below the knee and shattered his bone. So his leg had to be amputated, which it was, and then he proceeded, after he was healing, to carve himself a leg out of wood. He attached it to his knee and started walking around the house. After that, he began to walk around the yard, and eventually he was able to walk all the way to Salt Lake to work on the Salt Lake Temple again, which he loved. And it was he who hammered out the declaration on the Salt Lake Temple that we can see today, "Holiness to the Lord, the house of the Lord." He exhibited faith and fortitude and obedience, commitment, and covenant keeping. The pioneers came to know our Heavenly Father in their extremities, and we are no different today. We come to know him in our extremities. They received many blessings and miracles in their lives, and we too receive many miracles and blessings in our lives. One day I was out in my yard and was told by a voice to go in the house. And I did, and then came out later, and also it said that tree's coming down. And one of the big trees in our yard had fallen down while I went to the house, inside the house. I came back outside and it was laying on the front yard. And we are protected and blessed in our day, just like the pioneers. I'm grateful for the pioneers. In Isaiah, it says that they should gather to the tops of the mountains. And one of our hymns talks about faith in every footstep. It says, "With faith in every footstep, we follow Christ the Lord, and filled with hope through his pure love, we sing with one accord. Those marvelous saints who embraced this great work and shared it in lands far and near, who gave all their heart, mind, and strength to the Lord with wisdom and vision so clear, now stand as examples of virtue and faith, of souls prepared to hear, of knowledge sure, born of humble heart, and love that banished fear." And then the next verse says, "If we now desire to assist in this work and thrust in our sickle with might, if we embark in the service of God and harvest in fields that are white, our souls may rejoice the salvation of God, the fullness of his light, that we may stand free of sin and blame, God's glory in our sight." And I believe that the pioneers were wonderful examples for us today of faith and fortitude, commitment and covenant keeping. We are no different today. We can be obedient and have unity with one another and cooperation, courage and sacrifice, and follow our prophet today, President Nelson.
Well, it's been a pleasure for us to be able to express some thoughts regarding our marvelous history here in Utah with the marvelous pioneers that really came here with faith. And we're so grateful for this opportunity. Thank you for listening, and we wish you all a very happy Pioneer Day on the 24th of July.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Ellen Jepson is the International President, Daughters of Utah Pioneers. She has also served as Daughters of Utah Pioneers' first Vice President, second Vice President, Lesson Committee, and Lesson Committee Chair. She loves researching her pioneer ancestors and sharing their stories to strengthen and uplift the current generations. We feel very privileged to hear from you this Pioneer Day. Thank you, Ellen.
I feel it a great privilege to be here speaking to you today in honor of the Days of 47 celebration for Pioneer Day. I am here in the Pioneer Memorial Museum in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I'm surrounded by artifacts and photographs of the pioneers. It just feels like I'm in the right place. I'd like to tell you a story of one of my favorite pioneers. Her name was Ellen Sanders Kimball. She was born a long way away in Telemark, Norway on April 11th, 1823. She was one of 7 children. Her family was very prosperous. Her father was a farmer and they lived very well in a beautiful place. But as the years went by, her father decided that he wanted to move to America to look for more prosperity. So when she was 13 years old, her family came to America, where they settled in Illinois. Within a few months, her sister and her parents all died of malaria, leaving 6 little siblings orphans. They had no place to go, no place to live, and they made their way to LaSalle, Illinois, where they felt like they had some relatives and friends from Norway. When they reached there, the children were farmed out separately. The girls became domestics, and the little boys became farm workers. They weren't able to see each other much, if at all. Before too many months had passed, some Mormon elders came to the town and began to preach. It was here that Ellen and some of her siblings were converted to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As soon as they could, they traveled to Nauvoo, where Ellen again worked as a domestic. She worked in the house of Charles C. Rich and then in the house of Heber C. Kimball. After making her way to winter quarters, she married a very kind man, Heber C. Kimball, when she was 21 years old in 1846. The very next year, in 1847, the Vanguard Company of Pioneers was organized to cross the plains. President Brigham Young showed great wisdom in selecting the men who would be part of the Vanguard Company of Pioneers. Each was chosen for a specific purpose, including scouts, explorers, frontiersmen, road builders, bridge builders, hunters, teamsters, scientists, colonizers, musicians, topographers and surveyors, carpenters, architects and builders, blacksmiths, masons, stonecutters, farmers, mechanics, shoemakers, coopers, wheelwrights, lawyers, millers, and mill builders. It was not intended that any women or children should join the first pioneer company because of the hardships and the dangers that they were sure to face. However, Harriet Wheeler Decker Young, wife of one of the Vanguard Pioneer members, Lorenzo Dow Young, pleaded so earnestly to Brigham Young to be included that he finally gave in and said she could come. President Young then allowed his wife and 2 sons, Clara Decker Young, Isaac Perry Decker Young, and Sobieski Young, along with Ellen Sanders Kimball, wife of Heber C. Kimball, to make the journey. Harriet was Clara Decker Young's mother. The women were ministering angels to the men and all the sick and afflicted on the journey. On April 16th, the company was officially organized and they started on their way. 142 men, 3 women, 2 children, and 72 wagons. They traveled 1,031 miles to reach their destination. The 3 women on the journey were kind-hearted and loving and did all they could for the comfort of the company, and they arrived here in the valley on July 24th. After arriving, a small fort was built. It was for shelter and protection. Ellen made her home there and was given a small room, and just 1 month later, Heber C. Kimball left with most of the men to return to winter quarters to help them prepare for the journey for the next year in 1848. Ellen was left alone with the other 2 women and other members of the party to stay the whole winter and do the best they could to help settle. Ellen Sanders Kimball was a courageous pioneer, worthy of remembrance by all of us. She had 5 children, 3 of whom died in infancy. She loved her family and contributed all she could to the settlement of the valley. Ellen Sanders Kimball, Clara Decker Young, and Harriet Wheeler Decker are all memorialized on the monument at This Is the Place Heritage Park. Remembering the histories of the pioneers and preserving their artifacts and photographs can help us remember the sacrifices they made, so many of them that now benefit us. I'm standing here in front of the wagon. That was the actual springboard that Brigham Young rode in when he came across the plains in 1847. David King Udall wrote this about the wagon. He said, When John W. Young made the trip to Moenkopi Indian Village in northern Arizona, he drove the very same wagon in which his father, Brigham Young, was riding when he first viewed the Salt Lake Valley. John W. Young later drove this wagon to Apache County and abandoned it at the Windmill Ranch belonging to Ammon Tenney, about 25 miles northeast of St. John's, Arizona. He considered it just an old, worn-out wagon. During my first year in St. John's 1880, I learned of the whereabouts and history of this wagon and that it was in danger of being dismantled and carried away. I hired a man to go out with a team of oxen and bring this wagon back to St. John's. We built a shed for it on the tithing lot where it was then stored. In 1897, the year of the Golden Jubilee of the church, a call was sent out for all pioneer relics to be sent to the church headquarters. I notified them that this old historic wagon was in St. John's, Arizona. The committee sent me $10 to cover the cost of crating the wagon, and Elijah M. Freeman, one of the first pioneers, hauled it over to the railroad at Navajo Station, from where it was then shipped to Salt Lake City. For many years, it was in the Museum of Relics at the Utah State Capitol. It is now in the Pioneer Memorial Museum. And this is the actual spring wagon that Brigham Young rode in. When it was built, it had benches down both sides placed lengthwise in the wagon. This provided for a council house for Brigham Young as he crossed the plains. He had purchased the wagon in Nauvoo, and it had been built by a Mr. Eldridge there. This wagon is very precious to us here at the Pioneer Memorial Museum, as are all the artifacts and photographs and histories that we have collected for many years. We preserve them, we care for them, and we love them. They help us to remember. They help us to remember the pioneers and all they did for us. And in this holiday of July 24th, 2020, remember your pioneers, remember what they sacrificed for you, and remember the legacy that they have left us. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all those of you who have participated, and to all of you for joining us. I can remember several specific occasions where remembering my pioneer ancestors and their stories increased my faith and gave me strength and protected me. These stories need to be kept bright in our hearts. In 1842, Joseph Smith encouraged the early saints, saying, "Shall we not go on in so great a cause? Go forward and not backward. Courage, brethren and sisters. On and on to the victory. Let your hearts rejoice and be exceedingly glad." What applicable counsel. May God bless us as we all go on in so great a cause. To conclude our meeting, we will hear a beautiful rendition of Israel, Israel, God is Calling, performed by Cassidy and Jordan Gunderson. Following our devotional, we've included several speeches from some of the incredible women who applied to the 2020 pageant. Though the pageant had to be canceled, these beautiful women were willing to share their faith and their stories with us. Thank you again, and happy Pioneer Day.
Israel, Israel, God is calling me from lands of woe. Babylon the great is falling. God shall all her towers o'erthrow. Come to Zion, come to Zion, ere his floods of anger flow. Come to Zion, come to Zion, ere his floods of anger flow. Israel, Israel, God is speaking. Hear your great deliverer's voice. Now a glorious morn is breaking for the people of his choice. Come to Zion, come to Zion, and within her walls rejoice. Come to Zion, come to Zion, and within her walls rejoice. Israel, angels are descending from celestial worlds on high, and to men their power extending, that the saints may homeward fly. Come to Zion, come to Zion, for your coming Lord is nigh. Come to Zion, come to Zion, for your coming Lord is nigh. Israel, Israel, canst thou linger still in error's gloomy ways? Mark how judgment's pointing finger justifies no vain delays. Come to Zion, come to Zion. Zion's wall shall ring with praise. Come to Zion, come to Zion. Zion's wall shall ring with praise. Ring with praise.
My name is Ariana Hayner, contestant number 22. My great-great-great-grandfather, Henry Sheaver, was an avid gardener. When he came to the Utah Valley, he had nothing to start with but a dream of growing things and a willingness to work for it. As opportunities came to him, he faced some real setbacks though. First, he obtained acres of land and planted beautiful crops in them. But then a sudden and crippling physical ailment stopped him from being able to harvest, and he had to sell most of his land. As soon as he got better, he set right to work and planted incredible apple orchards. Soon after that, the codling moth made its appearance, and he was forced to destroy his apple groves. These were only some of the challenges that he fronted, but in the face of opposition, he never gave up. Instead, he learned from his experiences, trusted in God, and tried again and again. Later, he became a renowned nurseryman who blessed his family and community with his skills greatly. Opposition is real and alive today, just as it was years ago. Today, it comes in the form of fears, discouragement, lack of self-esteem, physical limitations, and currently a worldwide pandemic. But I promise that just like our pioneer ancestors, we need not let those things inhibit our progress or possibilities. The same unconquerable spirit that Henry Cheever possessed is alive in you and me. With it, we can be resilient, persistent, faithful, and diligent in our challenges. Just like my great-great-great-grandpa. Thank you. My name is Ariana Hainer, contestant number 22.
I'm contestant number 3, Madeline Levitt. It was the year 1856 when Maria Louisa Penn started out on her lengthy journey with Captain Hunt's company of saints, the last wagon train of the season. It was a bitter winter with frozen grounds, but the hearts of the saints were warm as they set out for Salt Lake City, Zion. Maria Louisa was pregnant with her 4th baby and gave birth in the direst of circumstances, in an upright position within the constricted wagon, because there was not sufficient room for her to lay. Her sweet baby girl was born, but she died that same day. Maria's family stayed back to dig a shallow grave for her infant in the cold, frozen ground. As they continued on with their wagon train, Maria looked back for a moment to see a pack of wolves digging furiously at her infant's grave. My ancestors buried their loved ones. They gave up all their worldly possessions, consistently relying on the Lord. This has given me peace to know that, though I have not been called to pull a handcart across the plains, I too can endure the trials that I have been given through my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. The pioneer spirit of my ancestors did not die with them, for it is still very much alive in my heart and in the hearts of all those who choose to follow in the pioneer's footsteps and devote their life to faithfully serving our Savior. I'm contestant number 3, Madeline Levitt. I feel very honored and blessed to be a part of this amazing experience where I can honor my ancestors through stories and keep their faith and their spirit alive.
Hannah, a 48-year-old mother and grandmother, lay deathly ill in bed when 2 missionaries arrived at her home. They told her they were teaching a new doctrine and that with faith she could be healed. The elders placed their hands on her, and one uttered the words, "In the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, be thou made whole." That day, Hannah Knight Libby Carter was baptized a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and became faithful from that hour onward. Over the next 30 years, she would face overwhelming trial and immense hardship. She, her faithful children and grandchildren would be driven from their homes by violent mobs and would be among the saints immigrating from Ohio to Missouri and from Missouri to Nauvoo. During this time, Hannah would experience the loss of multiple cherished family members, including the death of her son on the famous March of the Mormon Battalion. Yet despite all this, she remained faithful to God and to what she knew in her heart to be true, eventually reaching the Salt Lake Valley. Hannah's life can be summarized by the beautiful inscription engraved on her headstone, "Faithful in the day of trial." How can each of us keep the pioneer spirit of faith in the day of trial alive today? Over the past few months, our communities have experienced earthquake, sickness, isolation, unemployment, and many other unforeseen challenges and setbacks. Overcoming fear for the seemingly unstable future ahead, we have the sacred opportunity to carry on the legacy left to us by our beloved pioneer ancestors through daily acts of faith, charity, sacrifice, and service. I'm humbled at the sacrifices made by the early saints, including my 4th great-grandmother, Hannah Carter. We honor them every day as we choose to keep their spirit alive through faith in the day of trial.
Hi, my name is Kiara Hobbs, contestant number 16. When I heard this year's new theme, A Pioneer Spirit Alive Today, the emphasis on the word today continued to stand out to me in particular. If we think about it, each morning that we arise, we are granted with a new today. A new day to make choices, a new day to embrace. Like our pioneer ancestors, they taught us valuable lessons on how we can live our day-to-day lives. One of those being enduring to the end with positivity. If we reflect on countless journals written by our loved ones crossing the treacherous plains, I stand amazed to think that despite the hardships and the trials that they went through, they still recorded feelings with grateful hearts and hopeful eyes of what a new day would bring, despite their aching feet and their hungry stomachs. they chose to make the best of their situations. Today, we don't have to pull handcarts, and we don't have to leave our families behind, and we don't have to walk thousands of miles. However, we still have hardships and trials that may cause fear and pain. It's moments like these that we can pull the spirit of our ancestors' courage, strength, and positivity to remind us to not only to keep pressing forward, but as a reminder that with a positive outlook, we can change the world. It is with this attitude that our capabilities become endless. I'm sure there were many people who told the pioneers that crossing Utah was crazy and it could not be done. But thanks to their dedication and their hopeful hearts, their hope for a new world, we have the place that we live today. Not only that, but they have taught us how to live today. My name is Kiara Hobbs, contestant number 16. Thank you.
Hello, I'm contestant number 12, Ilea Washington. As I was looking at the theme for this year, I really grew to love it. The theme is Pioneer Spirit Alive Today. I think that is so true. We are all modern day pioneers. Yeah, we may have some differences than the pioneers back then, but yet we're still all pioneers in our own way. And their spirits and our spirits are alive today, still bringing the pioneer joy alive. I'm so grateful that I get to live in this beautiful state to be able to celebrate an amazing event like this. Just like the pioneers, we go through hardships and trials every day. But yet, when the pioneers were going through it, and as they were still losing people along the way here, they were still joyful and happy. And we can still be that way too. And I see that in this world today, especially during this current pandemic that we're going through. Yeah, there may be some craziness, but I still see my friends having fun and still celebrating despite the current circumstances they're in. So we can be a lot like the pioneers and still get through these hardships if we're still happy and joyful and we can keep on going. And that's why I think the pioneer spirit is still alive today. To close, I am contestant number 12, Ilea Washington. I'm so grateful for this opportunity that I still have to be able to run for Miss Days of 47 despite our current circumstances. I can't wait to meet everyone real soon, and I'm hoping it's not going to be too long. I'm excited to see what this year has in store, and I'm so grateful that this has given me the opportunity to really dive deep into my pioneer heritage and learn a lot about my pioneer ancestors. I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Samantha Harding and I'm contestant number 7. When thinking about Pioneer Spirit Alive Today, I think of the acronym ISDUP. No, not the one you usually think of, but one of my own invention. Pioneer Spirit is I, influential. It brings people together and helps them look to role models. It's S, stories, or built on stories. A goal of the ISDUP, the original acronym this time, is to, as Ellen Jepson would put it, perpetuate family names and achievements. In other words, they're stories. Personally, these help me and show me role models. It's D, determination, or shows determination. Like the women's suffrage movement that we are celebrating a century later, we can be determined to fight for what's right like these strong women. It's U, unity, or creates unity. Like the actual ISDUP says, there's always room for another daughter. This idea of unity can be seen today as we fight this global pandemic. It's P, perception, or changes perception. Knowing what my ancestor, James Henry Rollins, went through crossing the rivers in Wyoming and recovering a kidnapped son on the trails, I perceive my life differently. I'm grateful for the sacrifices he and others before me made. I'm also grateful for those of you working hard to keep this pageant going. I'm so excited to take on this opportunity. My name is Samantha Harding, I'm contestant number 7, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart.